Well, hello, friends and fellow pioneers. I have Dr. Miles Jones with me. He has come back again to talk to us pretty much part two. We left off the last interview talking about this book, The Coming Crisis, Answering the Call from Sinai in a Time of Chaos. And this is a book that Dr. Jones shared. He felt like God wanted him to write before the election last year. And where we ended off on the interview, I'll let Dr. Jones talk about that, but it had to do with education and the next generation. So, Dr. Jones, how did you get involved in this work of education? Share with us what you're doing to help be part of the solution.
Well, thanks for having me back, Aurora. Well, I was saved actually, and all the ideas that I had about being some kind of hotshot educator went out of my head, and I just wanted to really go to the, I don't know, maybe the poorest place in the United States and help people, help kids. And that would, here in Texas, that would be the border. So I ended up getting um, a teaching certificate in bilingual education, and I did teach young kids from the barrios. And I had a one child who was gifted, and their parents knew it, and they complained several times to the principal that their child was not being challenged, because you basically teach to the average, right? And I could tell that they were going to pull their child from my class and putting him in somebody else's class if I didn't do something. And it was a real shame, because I was probably the only accelerated learning expert that they had on their on their staff working, or possibly the entire school district. Um, so I went to the principal and I asked, well, I will do this. I will do an accelerated learning program for this gifted child, but I want to do it for all the children, not just this child. And so I may need to get like other books from our supplies, our book supplies, to take them up to the next level, the next grade level, if needed. And she said, well, anything we've got you can have. So having gotten permission, I had a meeting with the parents, and they implemented an accelerated learning program with their children. Um, and the children did great using our early systematic phonics and basic math practice. We got them through the basics, and really, well, we're the school standards call for example, the multiplication tables to be mastered by fourth grade. But I promise you, you can go into any fourth grade classroom, and most of the kids don't know the multiplication tables. For that matter, you can go into any 12th grade classroom, and the kids don't know the multiplication tables. So the 4-year business is ridiculous. We find that by experimentation, children can learn any one of those skills to mastery, getting it right away every time, um, in 3 weeks for any one of those skills: addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division. So even if they do them, we usually will work on addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. But in any case, after 3 months, the majority of children had mastered their math skills, and we're reading first in Spanish, because Spanish is a very phonetic language, and they're ready to learn Spanish. And in the process, I taught them the phonics of reading English. And so then we flipped over and started teaching them English. They could read the words. Oftentimes, they did not know what the words meant, so it became more of a vocabulary lesson for them. But they read the first, second, and third grade curriculum, reading curriculum, in both Spanish and English. The majority of the kids in the class, and so 12 out of 20 were double promoted from first grade to third grade in the following year. Uh, They also did their basic math operations. Um, and then what do you do after you've mastered addition, subtraction, multiplication, division? You go on. The next two math operations are powers and roots, which are the core of higher mathematics because they're easier, basically, to calculate. So they learned that. Then we started teaching them. And at a certain point, all of this learning creates an accelerated learning curve so that you generally you start out and you kind of go up gradually, you know, and like this. But in accelerated learning, you create a curve where at a certain point they start to go up exponentially, like this, kind of like a bowl, really, an inverted bowl, and they will kind of go up exponentially. They'll get it and they'll start operating on it, but the teacher has to know how to get them there, and they have to follow them when they get there. I remember the time it happened in the classroom. First time, uh, I was teaching them the first method of doing rapid mental calculation, which is dealing with lots of zeros, which is really easy. I mean, however many zeros you have in both of your multipliers, that's how many zeros you'll have in the answer. So, 5,000 times 5,000 is 25 million. It's really easy. 6 zeros, we say million. So they started putting problems on the board. We had blackboards that went across the entire wall, and I went back to doing my grading. And when I turned around, the children had filled that blackboard with huge problems that they were multiplying out that had all these zeros in them. And they wanted me to check them. And they had them correct. They'd done them correctly. So what do you do with that? At this point, they're hitting that accelerated learning curve that's starting to go through the roof. And you have to go with them. Otherwise, they turn into a rocket that runs out of fuel and they immediately come back to Earth and crash and burn. But you have to go with them. So how do you do that? Well, I taught them scientific notation, which is basically how we keep track of zeros and how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide with scientific notation. We moved on to other rapid mental calculation skills and pre-algebra skills. And they just kept eating it up. That class taught me an incredible amount. Whatever idea I had of what their limitations were completely exploded by their actual achievement. And I had enough sense to go with it rather than trying to tamp it down. And so we just had an incredible year, and I've had many since then. But it caused a problem. You're asking how we got started. So this is how the program started, and the caused a problem with these children. Basically, I was implementing what I came to understand later on as I became saved, and I started studying the Bible and started implementing it consciously. I was implementing what's called the call from Sinai, the call for our children to learn, and ourselves to learn the word and the writing of God. And so with these children, what I was basically doing was giving them the opportunity to go as far and as fast as they were willing to go. So they learned 3 years of reading and math in 2 languages, which was incredible. And these were not these were not specially selected gifted students, although I do think all students are extraordinarily capable. But they were not specially selected. They were just an ordinary group of students from the inner city barrio, and they did this amazing work. Um, what I would like to do, Aurora, is tell your people what happened, if you want to bring up this slide that we have, um, in the next year, the students, 12 of the 20 students had been um, promoted, double promoted from first grade to third grade. But then one teacher didn't like it, and so she failed her 5 children that were from my class, failed and put them back after the first 6 weeks and put them back in second grade. Basically, second grade in the inner city schools has a curriculum based on cutting, pasting, and piddling, uh, and Crayolas. Um, so they all the skills that they had gotten with me, they wouldn't touch. They'd basically been put out to pasture, and this is very, very serious, because you can in a very short time get children to a very high level of ability, but then when they go back in the system and they're just uh, none of those skills are ever touched again, they lose them. So uh, I had a child in second grade. I remember her name was Schindel, and she kept in touch with me later on through the years, and take her out for an ice cream every once in a while. And she called me up. She was in sixth grade by then. Now and she was failing mathematics, and this child in second grade could uh, mentally compute the cube root of a 6-digit number in her head, pretty much instantaneously within a few seconds. Right now, she's in sixth grade and she's failing mathematics. What have you done to my student? What has the school done? Well, it's pretty easy. If you don't practice those skills, you lose them. And so they put her into programs that were so basically retarded, remedial, if you will, that they never picked up, they never developed those skills and moved ahead. They moved backwards until they're failing again, like most of the other kids in the class. So I set up a contest in order to publicize this, so the kids would get to go back to their advanced placement. And I set it up with Mensa. Mensa is the high IQ society. These people have to take tests to prove they're in the top 2% of the smartest people in the nation. So we took them to a Mensa conference, and these are just little barrio children. Uh, Anybody who wanted to come, that's always our rule. We don't just take the best and the brightest of the kids. We take the ones that show up, and that's who does the demonstration. But we went to this high IQ society conference, and we asked if there were any PhDs in the audience, and there were 3, and they were kind enough to form the team for the Mensas, and we gave them calculators. So the Mensa PhDs had calculators, and they competed against the barrio elementary school children. They're just out of first grade. They're in second grade, but it was the first semester. It was Thanksgiving in 1994, in 1995. And the barrio children, and this whole thing was being done in English. So the students didn't know English a year ago. So they had learned English in my class. We're doing this whole demonstration in English, competing against the Mensa PhDs in a contest of speed and accuracy in calculating powers and roots. So the team that got the point had to be first, and they had to be correct. So the children without the calculators, that both sides had to write down the problem and the answer. And this was really quite a bit of a nail biter, because I didn't have any idea whether these children could pull this off. It was the first time we had ever done it, but they did beautifully, and they beat the Mensa PhDs by a score of 14-6. And that was an amazing result. And since then, we've done it many times with professors, with teachers, with parents. And the children have never lost in a competition like that. Of course, that it could happen. But what we're doing is we're implementing something that comes straight from the book. The call from Sinai, which is, as far as the children are concerned, it's best illustrated by the children in Daniel, right? And this reflection of Exodus, I think it's Exodus 35, where it talks about they gave them knowledge and skill. And here we see the same thing happening. They'd already learned the word of God from their elders, these Daniel and his cohort. And now God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom. And when he came to check on them at another time, he found that the king found that in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the wise men that were in his realm, which is interesting. That's Daniel 1:20. That's the godly yardstick. Sounds like a rhetorical flourish, doesn't it? Just, an exaggerated piece of rhetoric. And the Bible does use exaggerated rhetoric sometimes. But I checked it out. I decided I would check it out. Do children have that kind of capacity? Did God give our children that kind of capacity that they could be 10 times better at some things, not everything, than all the wise men in the realm? Well, that really depends on whether you consider Mensa PhDs as a reasonable approximation of the most knowledgeable men in the realm. Well, you'll have to be the judge of that. I think they were. But when the children beat them by 14-6, it was quite it was quite a victory, for them and for really, I think, God's call from Sinai that we have mostly been ignoring. The Jewish people basically got it, and they really introduced this kind of learning to the world, and it was copied by the Greeks. It was, and that classical model was continued by the Romans, and then later on the other countries picked up on the classical system of knowledge, which of course they think came from the Greeks, but it does not. It originally came from the Hebrews. Now here's some of the competition problems. So you can see them on the screen. You can calculate some of them in your head if you would like. Remember, these problems are being done mentally by children that are barely out of first grade. That's the kind of potential. And they beat the Mensa PhDs by 14-6. Clearly, they were faster and they were more accurate than the Mensans with the calculators. So it's just an incredible, miraculous, really is a better word for it. It was a miraculous outcome. And it was an exemplar to me. It was a big wake-up call for me. That this is the potential in our children that we are typically throwing away by really not following the call from Sinai in our education of our children and ourselves, because it works on adults as well as it does on children. And since then, we've done it over and over again, and we've used children of all ages, all races, all socioeconomic status, and we've never been beaten by a team with merely calculators in their hand. So it has proved to be a resounding success. And being a resounding success is not always the thing that works on a marketing basis. So the question is, are these Mensa PhDs and going up against these children, do you judge these children to be 10 times better than the Mensa PhDs they went up against? 10 times better, that's a pretty That's a pretty impressive godly yardstick to be using. You're going to have to be the judge of that. I do. I always have thought it was astounding that they could do what they did, but even though I taught them, but we're able to do that so reliably. It is um, it's kind of routine except for the results. So I know that our school system can succeed brilliantly. So this is really what brought me back to faith, to be honest with you, is that I really cared about these children, and here I am. I've found out what the problems were in the educational system as far as the teaching methodology is concerned, and I have fixed them at least in some really important areas. And then I discovered that they're not interested in the answer. What does that tell you? And there's for the things the progressive education type of agenda and methodology that they actually use in the schools, there is no research base for this methodological agenda. There is no research that says this is better than anything else. And that's a huge statement to make. But I have to tell you, I researched this for years because I could not believe it. I researched this easily for 2 decades. Uh, but I spent 10 years of just actually really concentrated study. And 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 I discovered that the methods we do use are actually many of them are contraindicated by research. Research showed them not to work, and yet the whole system is moving together as one, like lemmings to the sea over the cliff to the sea. They're just moving. Uh, and it's stunning when you see something like that, because especially when you know it doesn't have to be. Why are they doing that? And having researched as deeply as I have, I found only one answer to that solution, and that is Satan. There is power in the world that is out to try and drag us down into deception, uh, and that seeks our destruction, frankly. And once I made that leap, I realized, well, if that supernatural creature exists, God must exist. And I chose my side. I wanted to be on God's side, not Satan's side. But I see that there is a force that urges us to our self destruction, and that's Satan. And if we let Satan win, then uh, we'll get what we asked for, right? Um, and to see that the whole system moving in mass towards this self-destruction is rather frightening, you know. And they're justifying it by all of this writing and supposed research. Um, so that's what led me to a religious realization of what I was doing, and that what I was basically doing was implementing the great secret from Sinai. And then, of course, I started seriously looking at the scriptural basis of education. Um, and I was able to really refine and polish what we were doing and turn it into a curriculum, and make it work for homeschoolers or really anywhere. Um, and that's how we started with that's how the accelerated learning program started.
That is such a phenomenal and inspiring story, Dr. Jones. Thank you for sharing with us the genesis of Jones Geniuses. Um, so, I think a lot of the times that's where a lot of families will notice if their children are behind, and I've heard many instances where that actually compels or inspires or drives parents to pull their children out of the conventional system
Mhm.
of education. And, what I hear you saying is that the parents can learn it, the children can learn it, whether they're in school or homeschooled, that these resources that you've put together can work for any age, in any setting, as long as there is someone committed to teaching it and the child is interested in learning. So, talk to us about what's happening. We talked earlier on the our previous broadcast before this, and if you did not watch the earlier interview that I did with Dr. Jones, please do take time to go back and watch it. We were talking about discovery of ancient Hebrew manuscripts. But we ended the broadcast talking about this book, The Coming Crisis, and how education plays a big role in the problem and a huge role as part of the solution. And being able to have the confidence to first know how to learn. Uh, for my personal story, I remember that I loved math, but I never really had and I was in private schools in Venezuela, but I never had a teacher that really knew how to teach me in the way that I learned. So I had the passion, the desire to learn, but the learning styles didn't work for me. And it was not until we moved to the United States 30 years ago, and when I was in my last year of high school, there was a PhD in mathematics that was teaching, I believe it was algebra 2. And that was like a year of, you were talking about like a spiritual revival. That was my mathematical revival, because she would explain things, and it was always kind of like a difficult language for me. Sometimes I would be really excellent at learning it, and sometimes it was not, and I was not consistent in chemistry. I was not consistent in math and fractions and all the different things. I was very inconsistent. And so I would get one lesson and not the other, and sometimes you needed to learn them all, in sequence. And so, but there was this lady, um, I believe her name was Dr. Carr, and she could, at least for me, she could teach in a way that I could learn. and uh, and so I was able to actually, from that moment on, in college and everything, I was able to really grasp the foundation of algebra and all the things that I would need moving forward. And I had above 100, had like 104 average in her class. And then I took trig during that time, and because she gave me such a great foundation, then trig was another one that I had like 105 average or something like that. And so it became so attainable for me that I could like something and I could actually be good at it, that I could really learn how to dominate it. And I remember you were talking about the language difference. I remember I actually learned the division. I don't even know what it's called, but we learned how to work division differently. We don't show the work, we do it in our head. That's just how I was taught in Venezuela. So that was a really big problem when I was working problems like bonus problems and things like that, because they thought I was cheating or I didn't do the work. I was just taught differently, and sometimes I would not even get credit for my bonus things because I worked around it a different way. And so, we're talking about kind of some issues, right? That there's not enough room in the closed system, right? There's such a box, and if you're a thinker that wants to learn more or apply a different way that you've learned, there's really not a whole lot of room. And I was a very frustrated student in the public school system when we moved here, and I decided to be in public schools. And so, where this might relate to some of the people that are watching, maybe you're watching as an adult and you had a desire to, for example, like me, I wanted to know math. My grandfather only had like a fourth grade education in Venezuela, and he was one of the savviest people. He could do math in his head, was an amazing entrepreneur. And I wanted to do that, but I didn't really feel like I could do it. And when I heard about the work that Dr. Jones was doing, I wanted it for me. I was like, I want to go back and learn this in a way that's going to benefit me, and I can help children in our lives to learn. So we're here to empower you to understand, to be inspired, that there are resources like Dr. Jones has put together, and you do have access to these resources. We're going to talk about how to get the curriculum for advanced learning in math and reading also. But I just wanted to share. There are so many solutions that this covers, right? So many problems that can be solved through advanced learning, and to have the confidence that we can learn, like in the book of Daniel, like we can learn, we can be
Mhm.
inspired and do it in a way that's accelerated. And of course, the ways of God are outside of time anyway. There can be a suddenly at any moment if that's the time for you to do it. And so if you feel like this is a time to involve yourself, children in your life, in accelerated learning, we're going to talk a little bit more now about what that entails. Now, Dr. Jones, I'm going to go ahead and pull up. I actually had see, I had a
Yeah,
photo
go.
of um, the event that you mentioned.
Hmm.
Now, talk to us about. I looked here, and it says that you have. It said eight. Do I remember correctly? It's 8 different levels of accelerated education in the math
Yeah,
curriculum.
there are 8 levels now. Uh, I was working on. Well, I'd finished the algebra and geometry program. I was working on SAT prep materials when I was called away from the curriculum work to do the historical research that I'm doing now, which was strange. It's not easy to be called away from something, uh, and so it was. We developed it all the way through, yes, through algebra and geometry, which is pretty high. But people don't understand that SAT is a speed math test. It's not about trigonometry or even algebra 2. There may be an algebra 2 problem in there, maybe, but it's mainly just a speed math test. It's a thorough test of whether you're really grounded in your basic arithmetic, algebra, and geometry. It's a real interesting story of how this came about. I am an accelerated learning specialist, started out with languages. I was not a good math student myself. My first year was in engineering, and uh, I was I had marginal grades, what we call D grades, not even the C grades. D grade was enough to get you to the next level. But so I was a poor math student. Yeah, I never had the teacher that you know rang my chimes, if you will. However, I began a study of what we call prodigies. And many times we're talking about child prodigies, right? And in various subjects that might be language or memory, music or mathematics. And I began to study them and find out, and they weren't all children either. Some of them were adults, and some of them were even mentally challenged, or what we used to call retarded. Um, uh, Individuals. And I found in all of these case histories that I was studying, sometimes I would find the trigger. There would be an experience that triggered them. So I began to look for these triggers, and I discovered some really important things about these mental prodigies. Is that they weren't necessarily all children. They weren't necessarily all even literate. They weren't Some of them were adults, right? And the adults weren't necessarily literate sometimes. And um, the only commonality I found among them, some of them weren't even intelligent. They were actually what we would call retarded on the scale, or at least autistic. And so, what's the commonality among all these prodigies? Okay, they're not necessarily young or old. right? They're not necessarily young, brand new. They're not necessarily well educated. They may not be educated at all. They're not necessarily intelligent. They might be retarded, right? So, what is the commonality among all these experiences? Well, it was the triggering process. These people of all ages and uh, all intellectual abilities, um, they were triggered because they chose to do what they did. They became interested in it and they chose to start putting their time and energy into it and they became good at it. Um, so it was really an amazing experience. So I took what those children had done when there was a good enough description of how they did the calculations that they did and turned it into a curriculum later on. But the first thing that happened is as I was reading about these kids, these prodigies, I was triggered. And all of a sudden, this guy who was a very poor math student, uh, was doing all kinds of mental calculations in my head. And that's the only way I can explain it to you. It just happened. And all of a sudden, I was doing all of this advanced mental calculation in my head. And after a while, I started to using my 15-year-old algebra. That's how long I'd been out of high school. I started putting down in algebraic expressions the techniques that I was using to do the calculations I was doing in my head. And later on, when I taught the first graders, um, I simplified this curriculum so it was simple enough that even a first grader could do it, which is a great gift to have as a teacher to be able to simplify something that much that it can be taught even to very young children. Um, and that's really where the program came from. I was triggered. I had the experience. I was not a good math student before. I learned how to do all this stuff and was able to teach it to first graders in the barrio. Uh, that's a pretty interesting story, wouldn't you say? You still with me, Aurora?
I am, and was trying to find all the best ways to help people follow along what you're saying on the screen, because there's so much, like what you're talking about. There's so many resources on your website for not just early reading and
Right.
beyond, but for early math. And I will say that I remember Jason sharing his math story. I think we all have a math story.
Yeah, I suspect so.
um, but he was an engineering student and he really struggled because I think in ninth grade he I don't know if he was doing sports or something like that, but he took some, he just really was not as into the curriculum and whatever he was being taught, it just didn't stick, and he struggled so much. He had to like have tutors, and um, really struggled in the engineering program. And he actually wanted to do better in the electrical engineering program that he was in, but it was just consuming him, and it was like taking over his life trying to catch up. And so, his math story, he would have liked to have stayed in electrical engineering, but he decided, we met, this was 24 years ago, we met, and he said, like, either I'm going to have a life or I'm going to have an electrical engineering degree. And he just decided that it was, kind of, he felt like, okay, I'm going to be a family man now. And we got married. And he ended up switching to electrical engineering, which used the part of his brain for more processes and manufacturing and quality, which he also enjoyed. But his passion really was more electrical engineering. But he had kind of that, lame, let's say, like lame foot or lame leg with dragging himself with the math. And that's why we're talking about this, because if a child, if a young person has a good foundation, there's really nothing that's going to limit. It's not going to be because of their reading and comprehension. It's not because of their math limitations that they're not going to move forward. It might be another variable, but it's not going to be that. And so if we can be a catalyst to help children be able to fulfill their God-given purpose on this earth, and invent what they were created to invent, and come up with creative ideas, and not feel like, for example, with all of our stories, that we had to work really hard to try to, sometimes Jason gets talks about getting back to zero. It's you just feel like you have like this debt, right, that you're lagging behind, and just getting back to where you can now perform or function in the level that you need to be at, just getting to that level. So
Right.
I had pulled up several of the programs. Let's go over the math really quick that you were. I had it right here. Math. Okay. So let's see here. Oh, here. This is talking about that. Apologies. I really thought I had it pulled up. Okay, products. Okay, so under products, we have the math curriculums, learning reading program, memory programs, accelerated Hebrew language, and the bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah. So let's talk about the, I clicked on it again. See math. Okay, so I want to mention that he does have a digital download and a hard copy. And so so this one right here is, I'm gonna go ahead and make my screen larger. Okay, so if you become interested in this, just make sure that you see that right here. You can show the details for each one.
Well, we got into early learning, and we really have the finest early learning programs in the world that I'm aware of, and it is my job to be aware of what is out there. So the single most important thing you can do uh, to accelerate your child's education is to start early. So that's where the godly yardstick comes in. We have the progressive education mandates. Now remember, progressive education is the philosophical educational mandates of secular humanism. It just is. I'm not kidding. It was John Dewey did much to create the modern education as we know it, and he was also the author of the Humanist Manifesto. And he was a card carrying communist actually, and so that's where we're getting our educational system from. If you want to know. They rejected it later because they didn't like him, and the rising star in international communism uh, became really an educator of the United States and at the University of Chicago, and trained generations of leaders, and his methodology spread all over the United States, and he's still revered, but his methods were pretty much trash, to be honest. So we have um, we have a whole different system here. It's not what the progressive educators use. So it's something different. If we were doing the things they were doing, we'd be getting the results that they're getting. But ours is based on the abilities of children who have managed to succeed in a very extraordinary way and the methods that they use. And we're able to capture that and put it into a program. And the single most important thing you can do is start early. When does God make our children capable of learning to read and to do mathematics? Well, that's pretty easy. When they're walking and talking, that's when their cerebral cortex comes online. Now, your cerebral cortex is what gives you the ability to do um, use symbols to handle symbolic behavior. And reading and math are based on symbols, the letters and the numbers. Okay, so we find that kids at that age, a big obstacle to this has been that they don't have the visual acuity to distinguish small print. Their brain is not developed enough, literally, that they can see well enough to read what a standard primer of yesteryear used to be. So if we start with very large letters, and we start with letters that are about a half page tall, uh, and large numbers of that same size, they have no problem seeing them. And we teach what is considered what we call a matrix system. It is a dot matrix on each of the numbers. You can see each of the numbers has the corresponding number of dots to the number. So you can basically, you're learning three things when you count through these. You're learning the name of the number, of the digit. You're learning the quantity of it because you're also part of the programs. You're memorizing dot matrix system on them. And then when you count them, when you put two together and you count all the dots, you're learning to count forwards and backwards. So you're learning how to, by connecting the dots, you're making the number itself. So you're learning a lot from a very, very simple example, and it doesn't take very long. I mean, it just really doesn't. Now, the younger the child, the longer it will take because they have less brain development, but that's fine. You know, they'll get through it. It might take a child first grade age 2 weeks to go through the whole system, or actually maybe less than that. They may get it in a single day of working with the dot matrix. But a child that's 2 years old that doesn't have any of that background, it may take them a year or 2 years. I don't know, but it doesn't matter because they'll get there. But usually more like a few months. Uh, and the same thing with the reading. We do the same idea, except with letters. You have letter symbols. Now, the letter symbols are not pictures, but we turn them into pictures by using the alphabet mnemonics, we call them. So each letter is we take an animal and we twist that animal into the shape of a of the letter itself. So we don't do that just for every letter of the alphabet. We do it for every sound in the English language that they need to know. And there are like 42 sounds. There's 26 letters in the alphabet, and there are 42 sounds that they need to learn to master English. A lot of them have to do with the vowels. The consonants are not that tricky. It is the vowels because we have 5 vowel letters and 15 vowel sounds. So mastering those other vowel sounds. When you say them, what are the clues of how you do a vowel when it's either long or short, or it's one of the 5 other vowels? But we've managed to simplify it so that it can be learned by a child of 2 years old or younger, even if their cerebral cortex is online. They can learn that pretty quickly. In fact, it has really blown my mind, frankly, because we'll have kids reading on a second grade level, and you notice that they're still in diapers, and they're so young, they're still wearing diapers, but they were able to go through this whole program. So it's we never really expected that. We knew the program would be successful because it was based on solid accelerated learning principles and methodology based on the study of prodigies and what they do, and the study of accelerated learning uh, phenomena and methods and knowledge of how the brain works. Uh, but we're never really prepared for what that meant in the field. So all of a sudden, we got children who've mastered their basics of mathematics, addition, subtraction anyway, when they were still in diapers, and now they're getting up to, and then they go through our whole program, which is easy if you know how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. I mean, our program is simple. I can have you doing 5 digits times 5 digits in your head, in one class period, once you know how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. So they're they're mastering all of those things quite easily and quite early. So they've already got up to the top of our program, and they're doing algebra, and they're 8 years old. We've had this happen several times with children that started very early with us. Never expected that. Never expected that to happen, but they're doing it. They know how to do it. Now, since the book was not necessarily written for 8-year-olds, it takes a parent who can explain, who can be patiently explain how to do the materials. Um, but that's astounding. Uh, I mean, I really wasn't planning for that, so it's been quite a surprise to have children that are doing the basics of algebra and geometry at 8 years old, and they can do it. They can do things that you can't do because they
Mhm.
have learned the accelerated learning methods, and the accelerated learning methods are integrated into the program at ever higher levels. And so you do you do equations with large numbers in them because we know you can do it. So we'll do the simple stuff, but then we quickly move up into
And the key is that
accelerated learning problems.
they don't know how, like they don't know that they, if you're not imposing a limitation, like for example what grades do, like you are
Right.
limited to, if you're in this certain grade you only get to be exposed to that, and then it just puts a ceiling on the child for learning. And so what we're doing is just taking off the ceiling here and
Yeah,
saying, like,
no,
just keep going.
that's a real good way to put it. Like we work on the basis that all this should be seamless, meaning that when you finish one, you move on to the next level. I mean, it's not that you can't take a break if you want. You can do anything you want. But, we move on to the next level seamlessly. We don't tell our child that wants to learn how to read, oh, you'll learn that next year when you're in first grade. They want to learn how to read now. Motivation is the most important thing you could possibly have in that child. Next year, they might be totally turned off to learning for whatever reason. You know, oh, you don't know that. Strike while the iron is hot. While they got their information down, you notice that every summer we go through this ritual where the kids go out for 2.5 months, 3 months, and then they come back to school, and it takes them another couple of months to catch back up to where they were, you know, 5 months before when they ended school. So we continue to work seamlessly with them. It's not that you can't take breaks; you can. Uh, but we need to do some things just to keep the motors turning. So they move ahead at a much faster speed. And what you end up with is you create what we find that it's better to do it in groups, like form a co-op group together with your friends if you can. Uh, but you create an environment when you pull a group together where high achievement is normal. All right. It's no big deal. Everybody is doing it. So even children who are and trying to do the least amount possible to get by, not your children, of course, but other people's children that are trying to do the least possible to get by, they're still achieving at a very high level because their perception of the least that is expected of them to just get by is way up there, is much higher than it would be in another classroom. So you create this environment, you take the ceiling off, as you so accurately said, where high achievement is the norm. And these kids do it. My first graders, they didn't really have much of any idea what they were doing and how extraordinary it was. It was just normal. Everybody can do this, right?
You know,
everybody
and I heard
everybody can multiply 75 times 75, can't they? In their head.
well, you know, I there's a video that I really appreciate, and it's from a coach to entrepreneurs, and not really related, let's say, to education, but it's related to performance. And in this video, he talks about how fear and passion actually are the same type of emotion and can stop or paralyze people from moving forward. So people that were destined or created to do something, either the passion or the fear can actually basically like weigh them down, right? Because they're just overcome by it. And when you were talking about, you know, the children learning, one of the things, his name is Bill Barron, by the way, and so it's an old video that I just keep going back to because it just really challenged me on the idea of fear. I've never heard it explained that way, but you know what he says that he wants to see people do or be is curious, and children are very curious. And like you were talking about, that at that moment when they are ready to learn and they're curious about what the next level looks like, that's the opportunity, that's a perfect opportunity for success for them, because they're
Mm,
poised, they're positioned for curiosity, for discovery. And so
yeah.
what you've done here is created a seamless sequence for them to go through from. And so I have pulled up here the early, um, this one is called the Accelerated Learning Early Reading, Threshold to Reading. And this is what you were talking about here with the animals and the letters. And let's see here. I believe that's the one that I pulled up to give children to like have that foundation that you were talking about.
Hmm.
Um, what have you seen? You know, you talked about children as young as, you know, that are in like still in diapers. Um, Other than just starting early, are there any other conditions that you have observed? Well, you also mentioned, I will say that you also mentioned not just starting early, but having an environment where high achievement is a norm, not an exception, or
Yeah,
that it's
right.
desirable. But are there
Yes.
any other conditions or environmental
Yeah.
factors that you have seen
Yeah,
work well?
there's some very important principles. One of them is prioritization of objectives. Okay, look, there are endless things to learn, are they not? Are there more important things out of all of those millions of objectives? Are there objectives that are, what is the objective that's most important to you right now, where you are as a student? Well, for young children, it's going to be learning your math operations and your reading, your phonics for reading. Okay, those are the things that will open up the keys to the universe. Do you know we pay billions of dollars for our uh, what do they call it? The Head Start program. And do you know that they are forbidden to teach the kids how to read? And yet we pay billions of dollars for basically what is a babysitting service. Okay, well, I would, if you, so it's not a Head Start at all, is it?
Mhm,
Because they don't want to give them an unfair advantage. That's where your public school is. That's where they are. Okay, so the what we do is we prioritize the objectives.
mhm,
They never managed to teach the multiplication tables, so that their objectives are really off. They don't teach early systematic phonics, right? So guess what? kids go on to the next level, they can't read, they can't do math, and they're stuck there. They get socially promoted through school, or they get failed, or they drop out. Um, but that's what happens. You have to whatever the age of the child or the student, you have to figure out where they are now and start there, wherever that is. So when you take the kids and they're socially promoted from first to second grade or whatever, the teacher is paid to open the book, the second grade book, to page one and start teaching that material. That's what they're contracted to do. That's what they're paid to do. And that's what they do. And they leave all the kids that are not there behind. They're lost. They've just been written off. We know of the children that do not learn to read fluently in first grade, only 1 out of 10 ever learns to read fluently. That's not to say they won't read, but they will probably plateau somewhere between third, fifth grade level. Okay, so that's when you start getting into words that are larger, more technical words that are outside of your speaking vocabulary. So you can't guess them. You actually have to sound them out, and figure them out from their roots unless you know it. So you don't so that's where they tend to plateau, and it's a level of functional illiteracy in many cases. Is that, yeah, they can read, but not really well enough to like fill out an employment application very well, etc. This sort of thing, much less go on to higher education. So this prioritization of objectives is really important. So we hit it and get it. We teach the early systematic phonics, and bingo, they can read. All right. We teach the mastery, perfect mastery. This requires perfect mastery of their mathematical operations: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Bingo, they can do those things. You now have a child that can learn anything. They can learn science, they can read, they can do the math. All right, because science is all about math. That's how you spell science, by the way, Math. All right, so um, they can go on. And what generally happens in the public school, if you're not doing something like this, making sure they get those objectives, and then you move on, you do the priority objectives on the next thing. So many things are very, very easy to learn, but if you've got the priority objectives, you'll just cut through it like a hot knife through butter. Uh, so this idea of objectives is extremely important. So in mathematics, for example, there are 3 levels of knowledge that you need before you take up the what is called the threshold course of algebra, which takes you into higher mathematics. And everyone should at least do the threshold courses. But you have to learn basic uh, arithmetic. So that would be number one, the what we call the facts, the 100 different facts of addition. There's 10 digits, right? 0 through 9. So it's each digit times the other digits, that gives you 100 problems. In addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. Once you have mastered those, you go to the next level, which is factoring, because everything beyond addition is all about factoring. Are you good enough to break a number down into its multipliers? They're also divisors of the number when you're dividing. So 6 has the factors of 2 times 3. Those are the factors of 6. But so with that number, you can do everything with it. 2 times 3 is 6. 2 goes in the 6 3 times. 3 goes in the 6 2 times. You got it. So everything beyond addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, all your operations with fractions. You get into some very, very advanced operations in mathematics, but most all of them are going to have factoring at their core. You're going to have to be able to factor to do it. So if you're really good at factoring, and we factor the numbers all the way to 100, so you either know they are prime numbers or the composite numbers and what their factors are. You can do amazing feats of calculation with those. And the factors are absolutely essential. That's level 2, factor master. You have facts master, factor master, and then you're ready to go into fractions. And there are 8 operations with fractions. Each one is easy, really, if you know factoring. But to do an addition fractions problem, you may be doing a series of 5 different operations. You have to do each one correctly and quickly to get the answer. Now, this is usually where kids bog down big time. They don't get it. They never master their basic facts. They only touch on factoring for the most part, and their fractions are only the most superficial, basic kind of explanation of it. So they do not get good at fractions. And then they dump them into algebra. Now they're going to give you a passing grade in algebra 1, but algebra 2 they start to sort all these kids out. They're not going to give you a passing grade in algebra 2. You're obviously not prepared to go on to higher mathematics. And that's typically what happens. And it's not the kid's fault, it's the system's fault. They haven't taught him these things. You cannot do higher math without knowing how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. I don't care how many calculators you have. You can't do fractions without knowing factoring. You can't do all of the higher math operations without being able to do factoring and fractions. So those are the 3 levels. And we can move them through those levels. It takes about 3 months for each level. Okay, so you got a kid in first grade. By the end of a 9-month year, he can have finished all of those levels and be ready for algebra. Not play algebra, not pre-algebra, which is basically remedial mathematics because they didn't get what they need to actually go into algebra and succeed. It may surprise you to know they did not have pre-algebra in my day, because when people went into algebra, they were ready from taking their normal math classes. Pre-algebra basically is remedial math, okay, because you don't have what you need to go into algebra. So they will go into doing real algebra, real challenging algebra on an accelerated learning basis, which will step them up through the 10 basic equations, and have them doing rapid algebra, rapid calculation of equations, just like they were doing rapid mental calculation of numbers. Here's a big secret for you. Algebraic fractions are easier than arithmetic fractions because you don't have to do so much factoring. Um, a variable cannot be broken down because you don't know what it is. It's an unknown quantity. So they're actually easier if you know how to do regular fractions. So we have a very, very fabulous program for doing fractions. It's very easy. It's by the numbers 1, 2, 3. It doesn't matter how large the numbers in the fractions are. You know how to factor. You know how to do it. You can get the answer. So it's a pretty amazing system. Um, Frankly, and it allows you to move up through those levels stage by stage. Prioritization of objectives. There's a lot more to learn in mathematics, but it's all very easy to learn if you have those core objectives down pat. If you've mastered your facts, your factors, and your factoring, you're not going to have any trouble with algebra. You have to factor equations in algebra. That is no sweat at all for children who know how to factor. And the fractions, you'll use algebraic fractions, right? They'll throw variables in there. It is not a problem for kids to have a really good system of doing arithmetic fractions. So that's another one of the ideas in accelerated learning. It's not the only one, but it really is a science as well as an art. And I've been blessed to have those kind of I've been blessed with those skills, which are great skills for a teacher. I tell people I'm not a genius, but I am a genius maker. And we have one of the gifts that I've been given is
I
that,
love that.
and it's
A
true.
genius
What is
maker.
a
I'm
genius? A genius is as a genius does, right? If it
right and
walks like a genius and it quacks like a genius,
right.
it could be a genius, right? So
Yeah,
we're
so what I wanted to say is what I what I say to people is, as mentors, we don't really put things into you, we just draw out what's inside. And, to me personally, in the work that I do, it's the difference between, a teacher just throwing information at you and a mentor drawing out, like you were talking about, that limited potential to let you know, like, there's really, like, if you are supposed to accomplish something, there's not really a ceiling that you have to limit yourself because other people aren't doing or have not done what you're put on this earth to do. So why measure by what's being done, or what we can see right now? If a person wants to, has an interest, or that they have the potential, then they can keep going. So tell us more about being a genius maker. I love that.
There, yeah, it's the program is so reliable in getting kids through that um it's just by the numbers, really. But what you have is a lot of times the kids that come to us because they're way behind already, and oftentimes they come in and they've got either math phobia or another thing, I don't know what you'd call it, but they're angry. They're angry because, frankly, they don't know how to express this, but they've been cheated. And they know it somewhere in their subconscious. They don't know what to do about it. They don't know how to clearly explain it, but they're angry, because it's been made so hard, and they must have some idea in their head that it doesn't have to be that hard. But they're math phobic. They're afraid of it. They're angry. They have an attitude about mathematics. They don't want to do it. They are already starting to see you as an enemy. All right. Well, God has given me an amazing ability with these kids, and I'm really, really grateful to Him for giving me the insight. I can see that shield up when they come into my classroom, and I don't even try to assault the shield or blow it apart or bring it down or anything. I just joke around with them, and I'm friendly, and eventually they relax and they let their shield down for a second. And I can see it when it comes down, when they're unguarded. And I can get really maybe just a sentence, a message through to them that is like this. Uh, you know, if you don't want to do this, no one can force you to do it. So uh, you're you're going to win. If there's a battle, you're going to win. All right. But I guarantee you, I want to tell you this. If you are willing to give it your best shot, all right, I guarantee you that you will succeed. I will personally guarantee you that you'll succeed. I'll take care of it myself. And generally, they go home and think about it. Kids don't really want to fail in school or in life. They're just hurt, and they're confused, and they're angry over having been cheated. But for the most part, they will come back and decide they will give it a shot, and they put themselves into it, and they do the best that they can, which of course is plenty good enough, because wherever they are, I can take them to the next level and the next and the next, and we can go very quickly and get them to the point where they're succeeding. So I've had any number of children who've come in and they had math phobia, and they were really way behind, and to the point that mom was really afraid. And then the next year they might be captain of the demonstration team because they have the best achievement in the class, and math is their favorite subject. I remember one mother that came to me about her child who was 10, if I remember correctly, and she was in tears. She said, I think I'm going to have to put him in the Scottish Rite because I'm afraid that he's retarded. And I mean, she was really, really upset about this. And I said, well, let's see. Why don't you just bring him to class and let's see what we can do. By that time next year, he was doing rapid mental calculation on stage with all the other kids. There's nothing wrong with him. He just hadn't been taught well. And you can't imagine how many times I've had parents say to me, wow, why wasn't I taught this way when I was in high school? Because these parents carry around this burden that actually that they're not even aware of until they set it down, that they're dumb, right? And they're not dumb. It's just they haven't been taught well. And I know because I wasn't taught well either. I was not a good math student. When I was smart enough that I could get by, but I was not a good math student. It was not till later when I was given the gift of being triggered in the area of mathematics that I actually learned. I mean, I was like in my 30s before I learned really how to do what I know how to do and then put it into a curriculum and teach it. So, parents too feel that. We have the parents do the curriculum along with their children because they are the teacher. And like reading, as much as I enjoy teaching children to read, and I've taught hundreds, if not thousands, of children to read, that really is a joy that needs to be the parents. They need that bonding with their children. And there's nothing more important to your child's education than those first steps. Teaching your child to read and read well and do math well. And of course, the absolute first thing, and even more important than the reading and math, is their relationship to God, which is also their relationship to society and to their parents and to the school and the subjects that they're being taught and their respect for others. You can call it, if people are not religious, I will call them behavioral steps, their relationships, and and then the reading and the math, and then break it down into all the other subjects. So when you do it right, you build this huge pyramid of higher order thinking. But if you don't have the foundation work, it's just not going to happen. And if you do, then it's all easy, especially if you've got a good curriculum. And so that's what we do when God calls you to educate your children, as He will many people. It's going to happen more and more because the schools are getting worse, and uh, they may even start kicking out the kids that are unvaccinated, as far as I know. Uh, but it's getting worse and worse. And more parents are going to be pulling their children out. But when He calls you to the call from Sinai, when you're called, He will also equip you. It says that in Scripture, and I am the equipper because He also calls people to be the equippers and to teach parents how to do it, and how to overcome the lack of being taught well themselves. Um, because really, this is the work of Satan. There's not really much. It's just by the numbers 1, 2, 3. It's pretty simple, and once people understand it, they say, "Of course, early systematic phonics. Who knew, right?" Everybody knew. It's in all the research. There's tons of research on this stuff, and I've studied it. So the fact that we're not using the research based methods that have been proven effective is should be scandalous. But frankly, they're not even trying now. They're far more interested in indoctrinating children than they are in teaching them much of anything. Anyway,
Yeah,
and
that's a sad truth. I was gonna ask you again. We've been referencing that you felt called to write this book, "The Coming Crisis," and you discuss very in a lot of detail your experience in the education system and what you observed was happening. Now you shared that with the Head Start program, children are forbidden. If I heard you correctly, you just shared
teachers
that. Oh,
teachers are not supposed to teach them how to read. Now, I
right.
would I would anyway if I were teaching preschoolers.
So they,
Uh,
they,
I've gotten in trouble for that, but I would teach
yeah.
them anyway.
Well, and times are getting more and more complicated. With I remember even just like 4 or 5 years ago, we met someone that was used to teaching, and they were doing like sub work
Uh-huh.
as a sub, and they went back to the schools and they were trying to um, teach, and they were told to not teach the children, that they could only read the they could only read whatever they were told, whatever they were, the instructions or whatever. Like they couldn't think, they couldn't talk, they couldn't discuss anything outside of that.
Right. So
They couldn't discuss, like they
that's a
couldn't have a
good point.
conversation about what the curriculum was. They could only read it.
So there's that sort of falls under the principle of seamlessness that we had talked about. I can walk into any school and tell you what the approximate grade level, reading level of the children is. I just walk into the library. If there are no books above grade level in the library, there are no students that are reading above grade level. Where would they get it? From their parents? Yes, that's possible. But oftentimes, especially in the inner city schools, the parents have good values about education, but they don't know how to do it. And they may not be educated themselves. They might be illiterate. So they definitely don't know how to do it. Um, Now, working professionals that are educated professionals, they know the code word. Send your child to school reading ready is the phrase that they use, and we all know. I think you would probably know. This means send your child to school, not reading ready, but reading already, because we don't have a clue how to do it. So if you send your child to school reading already, of course anybody can teach them how to read. They already read. So that's the code. Uh, and so, educated professionals make sure their children get the reading instruction they need, either private schools or tutors are good. There are some good public schools out there, that's for sure. But they make sure they get what they need. They do it themselves if necessary. So we're all homeschoolers in a very real sense, because we all have to send our children to school reading already, because the system doesn't know how to teach them how to read. Um, Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, so for people that have children in their lives, maybe they are parents or grandparents, or they have maybe neighbors or anyone in their life that they would like to pass this information on to. I want to mention that we do have the Jones Geniuses link on the included in the description of this video, and you can share that link with family, friends, your community, for a possible resource to help children have a great start with reading, with memory. We didn't really go into didn't talk too much about the other curriculum, that is the accelerated memory programs, but that's available there. That has to do with.
Well, it's also integrated into the mathematics and reading curriculum. So uh, you will get it if you do our accelerated learning with us. You're going to get basic and advanced memory training, which is really important. So it's like I said, when we teach kids how to read well, then we teach them how to speed read well. It's just seamless from one thing to the next, and we teach them how to do memory training. We teach them how to do study skills. um, so it it's a program that works really well. So uh, yeah, and we have these. I want to just mention, you can contact me through writingofgod.com. You can email me. And be specific. We have plenty of free downloads. We'd be happy to give you free PDFs on early learning in mathematics and reading, and the whole program, in particular, in the memory part of it. Uh, a lot of really interesting things about memory training and about accelerated learning and the scriptural basis of homeschooling, for example. So, we'd be happy to share any of those with you, or all of them. So feel free to give me an email and tell me what your specific needs are, and we'll be happy to send you whatever we can for free and give you free consultation on what we would recommend for your children at this point. There is a math assessment test on our website. So under articles, you can just go under articles and there will be a math assessment test. I think it's the first one there. And so it's free download. You can take that and give it to your kids. It's very simple. And then let me know what their scores were and we can advise you for free, free consultation on what we would recommend for your children at that stage in reading and math. Um,
Fantastic. Well, thank you again, Dr. Jones, for sharing pretty much the day with us, sharing your knowledge, your journey of teaching, and the what happened when you stopped teaching and you got called to doing research with the Hebrew manuscripts. Again, if you are tuning in right now, we highly encourage you to go back and watch that interview as well so that you can learn pretty much the whole story of what Dr. Jones uh, moved on to work on with his um, pretty much pursuit, I guess, of these this knowledge that's been released for such a time as this, and using his background, it all came together to for the work that he's doing right now, leading teams with translating the Hebrew manuscripts. Um, but he's equally dedicated to both works, and so we wanted to make sure that we shared both of these wonderful resources that are uh, available through Dr. Jones, the Jones Geniuses Accelerating Learning Curriculum. And again, we covered in the earlier broadcast, which is the writing of God and some of the published work, including, again, how I referenced the Coming Crisis, this book. If you're interested in the work that Dr. Jones uh, wrote about what's going on in the crisis that we're experiencing today and what he feels are the biggest problems that led to the crisis today, and the solutions that are going to be the catalyst for um, preparing the next generation for such a time as this. That was all the inspiration for these broadcasts. And if you have any questions, again, I'm going to pull that back up. You can contact them through the contact us page, and I included the link in the description below. Do you
We
have
have
any?
we have two websites. One is writingofgod.com. You can contact us through either one. The website about the curriculum is called jonesgeniuses.com. jonesgeniuses.com. Uh, so um, either one, we'd be happy to hear from you.
And I'll go ahead and I'm pulling up the Writing of God website. That is what Dr. Jones just mentioned, and got stuck there for a minute. But Dr. Jones, thank you again. Do you have any final parting thoughts before I go ahead and go into the blessing?
Well, I just want to I want to wish pray for all of your viewers, because we're really in a critical time, and we need to awaken, and that happens in each of us individually, because these are dangerous times and we need to be prepared for what Yehovah wants us to do. But there is a huge movement of God in all of this craziness and chaos. There's a huge movement of God coming, and it started already. So you need to realize, you need to choose what you want to be a part of. Do you want to be a part of the chaos, or do you want to be a part of God's movement in the world? A lot of people are going to come to faith and turn from the absolute craziness of the era we're living for and begin looking for the truth, because there isn't any out there in our educational system or our political system today. There is so much lies and deception. that it is different on a wholly different level than it used to be in times past, and it's grown increasingly worse over the decades. And that's why the need for this book, The Coming Crisis, because it spells out exactly in detail exactly how we got here and what we need to do to get out of it. So, blessings to all of you, and shalom to you, Aurora. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you again, Dr. Jones. And so I'll go ahead and close as I normally do with blessing you all, and I'll do it in English and in Hebrew again. May the Lord bless you and keep you and shine his face toward you, turn his countenance toward you, be gracious unto you, and give you shalom peace. And in Hebrew, Yevarechecha Yehovah v'yishmerecha, Ya'er Yehovah panav v'lecha v'chuneka, Yisa Yehovah panav v'lecha, v'yasem lecha shalom.
Shalom.